Judge, what do you, from your own perspective, what are the most significant threats facing the judiciary at this moment?
One, of course, is their own personal security. There have been a lot of threats made against judges. The numbers are rising rapidly of those threats. And of course, there have been attacks on judges' families over the years. Judges themselves have lost their lives, sometimes their spouse, sometimes their children. So this is a real threat. It's not made up. It's very, very real. And the purpose of those threats, I think, is to intimidate judges and to say to them, we know where you live, we can go after you, we can get you, we can hurt you. And so the question is, are judges concerned enough that it will impact their decisions in cases? And the good news is, I think not. I think judges have been very courageous, not intimidated despite the threats, where people call the chambers and say, I'm going to kill you, you should be dead, I'm going to rape you and kill you. Really terrible, terrible threats have been made to judges. So that's one thing that I want to talk about. Another thing is the rhetoric that has been used against judges by not just disappointed litigants who may be not totally stable people, but by our highest officials. So the President of the United States has used language calling judges loony, crazy, traitors, and more along those lines. Radicals, I can't remember all the bad words he's used, but he personally will say that about judges. And that's not a good thing. It's not just the president, but also the vice president, also the attorney general of the United States. They've all used those kinds of words to describe judges. And what that does is it affects the public's respect for the institution of the judiciary. I think when the public hears the highest officials describe judges as partisan hacks and all the rest of the words I already used, it's hard for them to hold the judiciary in the high esteem that they once did. I do think it affects public perception, and it's hard to counter that attack on the judiciary. So that's the two kinds of attacks I worry about. The third is, of course, the concept of the judges who don't have life tenure. So you may know that federal judges have life tenure once they're confirmed by Congress and take their seats. But state court judges often do not. They often have to run in elections, and in those elections, their prior statements or prior opinions, prior decisions will be used in campaigns and held against them. There's also huge money that is now being poured into these campaigns for state court judges, so they have to be fundraisers. And they really have to be constantly looking over their shoulders, so to speak, as to the consequence of the decisions they make. And they're, again, very courageous to still write what they write and rule as they rule, knowing that there could be a recall election and be voted out of office. So they don't have the life tenure protection. So besides the terrible physical threats that state court judges face, they also could lose their job. Now, even in the federal side, I mentioned that federal judges have life tenure, but that's only Article 3 judges. So, for example, we have administrative law judges who handle immigration cases. And recently, 100 immigration judges were simply fired by the administration because the administration did not like their rulings on asylum cases. So they simply said, "You're fired." I mean, that, of course, was the television role that this president had before he was president. You're fired, so it was kind of his mantra. But to fire 100 judges because they granted asylum too often impacts their independence to make the decision they think they should make. So he has the right to do it, but is it moral or ethical to do it? They don't have life tenure. He can fire them, but I don't think it was a moral or ethical thing to do. So I think in broad strokes, I've answered your question about threats to the judiciary.
So 100 immigration judges who you referenced who were just fired, of course, that's also happening within the context where at the same time we're seeing increased calls for impeachment against certain district court judges. What kind of potentially dangerous precedent are we setting where we say judges can be impeached or removed because we just don't like their rulings?
Right. Thank you for reminding me about that as another threat to the independence of the judiciary. In fact, when you don't like a judge's opinion, typically the thing you do is appeal it. And then if you don't like that ruling, you try to appeal it again. And at some point, the ruling becomes final. And people are allowed to not like a judge's opinion, and indeed they're allowed to attack the opinion. And they can write an op-ed or they can speak out in any forum they want. But impeachment should be limited to something called high crimes and misdemeanors. It is not meant for, I don't like the opinion you just gave. I don't like your ruling. You're ruling too often against the administration, so you should be impeached. That's nonsense. It's unprecedented. It's a misuse of the impeachment power. That's all you can say. It's never been done in our history, except for the possibility that a judge actually commits a crime. So if a judge were to take bribes in chambers to fix a case, that's fine. That warrants impeachment. And it's happened a very few times in our history that there's been something like that. But never before has anybody ever suggested impeachment because they didn't like the decision of the judge. It's just wrong.